The morning rush at the morning grind had reached its peak when she walked in. A woman in her early 30s, well-dressed but visibly trembling, stood frozen at the counter, her mouth opened and closed, producing only fragments of sound that made the teenager behind her smirk. She pointed desperately at the menu board, her hands shaking as frustrated sighs rippled through the line. Then the barista stopped mid-pour. He sat down the pitcher, wiped his hands on his apron, and stepped out from behind the counter. The entire cafe fell silent. No one expected what came next. Marcus Reed moved with quiet purpose, his worn sneakers barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. He positioned himself directly in front of the woman, close enough that she could see his hands clearly, but far enough to give her space. Then, without a word spoken aloud, his hands began to move. The motions were deliberate and fluid, each gesture carrying the weight of genuine intention. He signed slowly, his expression warm and patient. The woman's eyes went wide, her lower lip trembled as she watched this stranger, this coffee shop employee in a faded green apron, communicate with her in the only language that had ever felt like home. She brought her hands to her chest almost protectively before responding with movements of her own. Her fingers asked the question her voice could not. He nodded, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face, and continued the conversation entirely in American Sign Language. He asked about her preferred milk, whether she wanted sugar or flavoring, if she preferred her drink hot or iced. Each question came with patience that seemed almost infinite, as if the growing line behind her simply did not exist. The transformation in the cafe was immediate and profound. The teenager, who had smirked moments earlier, now watched with something approaching shame. A businessman in an expensive suit lowered his phone, his impatient expression softening into quiet observation. An elderly woman near the window pressed a napkin to her eyes, moved by something she could not quite name. The exchange lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though it felt suspended outside of time itself. When Marcus finally stepped back behind the counter to prepare her order, his movements carried the same unhurried grace. He crafted a medium oat milk latte with the precision of someone who understood that some moments deserved to be treated with reverence. The woman received her drink with both hands as if accepting something precious. She signed "thank you" 3 times in rapid succession. Her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall in public. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the door, her shoulders hunched in that particular way of someone trying very hard not to cry in front of strangers. The bell above the door chimed softly as she disappeared into the gray Portland morning. Marcus returned to his station without acknowledgement or expectation of praise. He picked up the next cup, called out the next name, and continued his work as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. But his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the espresso portafilter, a small betrayal of the emotion he kept carefully contained. The elderly woman approached the counter after receiving her own order. She reached out and touched his forearm gently, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. She told him that was the most beautiful thing she had witnessed in 40 years of drinking coffee. Marcus simply nodded, his eyes briefly meeting hers before returning to the machine. Some things did not require words, spoken or signed, to be understood. The afternoon light had begun, its slow fade into evening when Marcus pulled his 10-year-old Honda Civic into the pickup lane at Willow Creek School for the Deaf. The building stood modest but well-maintained, its brick facade decorated with colorful student artwork visible through the windows. Parents lined the sidewalk, some chatting in small groups, others absorbed in their phones. Marcus stood apart from them, his eyes fixed on the double doors. When Lily burst through those doors, her entire body became a celebration of movement. At 7 years old, she possessed the boundless energy of someone who experienced the world through senses most people took for granted. Her light brown hair bounced in its ponytail as she ran, her pink backpack threatening to slide off one shoulder. She did not call out to her father. Instead, her small hands flew through the air, signing with the rapid enthusiasm that only children seem capable of producing. Marcus dropped to one knee on the concrete, bringing himself to her eye level. His hands responded to hers, asking about her day, her friends, whether she had finished her spelling worksheet. Lily's answers came in a torrent of movement, her face animated with expressions that added layers of meaning to each sign. A memory surfaced unbidden as Marcus watched his daughter's hands dance through the air. 3 years earlier, on a rain-slicked highway outside Salem, his wife Rachel had been driving to yet another specialist appointment. Lily, then barely 4, had been diagnosed with profound bilateral hearing loss at 18 months. The appointments had become routine by then. Specialists who used words like profound and permanent with clinical detachment. Rachel had been running late that morning, rushing to make a 9 consultation with a surgeon who might have options. The truck driver who crossed the center line had been awake for 22 hours straight. Rachel never saw him coming. Marcus learned about the accident from a state trooper who knocked on the door of their small apartment while he was teaching himself sign language from a library book. The book still sat on his nightstand, its pages worn soft from nightly study sessions. He had been an engineer then, a promising software developer with a corner office and a 401k. Within 6 months of Rachel's death, he had walked away from all of it. The demanding hours were incompatible with solo parenting a deaf 4-year-old. The daycare options for children with special needs carried price tags that consumed most of his former salary. The barista job at the morning grind paid a fraction of what he once earned, but it offered flexibility. Early morning shifts meant he could pick Lily up from school. The tips helped cover the speech therapy sessions that insurance deemed optional. That evening, in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment near Division Street, Lily sat at the kitchen table working on her homework while Marcus prepared dinner. The space was small but carefully organized. Every surface serving multiple purposes, a whiteboard mounted near the refrigerator displayed the week's schedule in bright marker. Picture books about deaf culture lined a low shelf within Lily's reach. The television played with closed captions enabled, a habit so ingrained that Marcus hardly noticed anymore. Lily looked up from her worksheet, her small hands forming a question that made Marcus pause over the cutting board. She asked if anyone had talked to him with their hands today. He thought of the woman at the cafe, her trembling fingers and tear-filled eyes. In 3 years of signing with strangers, of navigating a hearing world with a deaf child, he had never encountered another adult who needed his particular skill set quite like that. The exchange had lasted only minutes, but something about it lingered in his consciousness, like a melody half remembered. He set down the knife and turned to face his daughter fully, giving her his complete attention in the way that had become their unspoken contract. He told her, "Yes, 1 person." Lily's face brightened with curiosity, but she did not press further. At 7, she had already developed an intuition for the things her father held close to his chest. Helena Vance sat alone in her corner office on the 14th floor of the Vance Architecture Building in downtown Portland. The city lights spread beneath her like a circuit board, thousands of illuminated windows representing lives she would never touch. Her desk was immaculate, every item positioned with architectural precision. A crystal paperweight caught the overhead light. 3 framed awards lined the wall behind her. A single photograph sat face down in her drawer, hidden from view. The morning's encounter replayed in her mind with uncomfortable clarity. She had been avoiding coffee shops for years, preferring the safety of her office private espresso machine, but this morning had demanded caffeine beyond what her small device could produce. A critical investor meeting loomed at 9, and her usual controlled demeanor had begun to fracture under weeks of inadequate sleep. The decision to enter the morning grind had felt like a calculated risk. She had prepared for the usual awkwardness, the confused expressions, the well-meaning but ultimately useless attempts at communication. She had not prepared for him. Elena lost her hearing at 19 during her sophomore year at the Rhode Island School of Design. The fever came fast and brutal, a viral meningitis that ravaged her auditory nerves. While doctors focused on keeping her alive, she survived. But the world she woke to was fundamentally different. Sound had been replaced by silence, so complete it felt like a physical presence. Her parents, both successful attorneys in Boston, had responded to her disability with a particular brand of helplessness that eventually curdled into distance. They did not know how to talk to a daughter who could not hear them. Within 2 years, their phone calls had stopped entirely. She built everything that followed from raw determination and carefully cultivated isolation. The architecture degree completed through accommodations and sheer force of will. The internship at a firm that specialized in accessible design, the eventual founding of her own company, focused exclusively on creating spaces that served the deaf and disabled community. Vance Architecture now employed 47 people and had completed projects in 11 states. Elena had achieved everything she once dreamed of and more. Yet, sitting in her corner office, watching the city lights blur through tears she refused to acknowledge, she felt the weight of 13 years of solitude pressing against her chest. She opened her laptop and typed the words into the search bar. The Morning Grind Portland Barista, ASL. The results offered nothing useful. Generic pages about coffee shops and scattered references to sign language classes in the area. The man remained anonymous, a ghost who had appeared exactly when she needed him and then vanished back into a world she could not access. Elena closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. A part of her wanted desperately to return to that cafe, to find him again, to exist for another few moments in a space where someone understood her native language. Another part, the part that had kept her safe through 13 years of building walls, whispered warnings about vulnerability and disappointment. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat by her window and watched the darkness slowly lighten into dawn, her hands occasionally moving through phantom conversations with a stranger whose name she did not know. 3 days passed before Elena found herself standing outside the morning grind again. She had changed her outfit twice that morning, eventually settling on a cashmere sweater the color of autumn leaves and dark jeans that cost more than most people's car payments. The contradiction was not lost on her. She ran a multi-million-dollar company, negotiated contracts with international investors, and commanded boardrooms with nothing but a whiteboard and fierce competence. Yet here she stood, heart racing like a teenager's, terrified of walking into a coffee shop. The bell above the door announced her entrance with a cheerful chime she could not hear. The morning crowd had thinned to a handful of customers, mostly young professionals, hunched over laptops. Elena's eyes swept the space until they found him. He stood at the espresso machine, his profile illuminated by the soft morning light filtering through the front windows. His dark hair showed early threads of gray at the temples. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, tamping grounds and pulling shots. Then he looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded counter. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. He held up one finger, asking her to wait and finish the drink he was preparing. When the customer ahead of her finally departed with their complicated order, Marcus turned his full attention to Elena. His hands moved before she could even attempt to gesture toward the menu. He signed her exact order from 3 days prior. Medium oat milk latte, no sugar. Elena felt her breath catch in her chest. He remembered not just that she was deaf, not just that they had communicated in sign language, but the specific details of what she had ordered. Her response came automatically, her own hands asking how he could possibly remember such a thing. His answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. He told her it was the first order he had ever taken in ASL from a stranger. The first time in 3 years, their conversation continued in fragments between other customers. A few signs exchanged whenever he had a spare moment. Elena learned his name was Marcus. She gave him hers. The exchange felt precious and precarious, like handling something beautiful and breakable. A commotion near the back of the cafe drew her attention. A small girl with light brown hair sat at a corner table, her hands moving rapidly as she communicated with another child nearby. The signs were unmistakable, even from this distance. Elena watched the interaction with growing understanding. Marcus noticed where her attention had landed. He sat down the milk pitcher and signed a simple explanation. That was his daughter, Lily, he said. She was 7 years old. She had been deaf since birth. The words hit Elena like a physical force. Her hand moved to her chest involuntarily, pressing against the sudden ache that bloomed there. He had not learned sign language as a hobby or for work or out of idle curiosity. He had learned it for the same reason she had been forced to learn it herself, because it was the only way to communicate with someone he loved, because silence had demanded adaptation, because love required meeting people where they lived. Even when that place existed beyond the reach of sound, Elena's eyes filled with tears. She could not hide. She signed a response without thinking, telling him she understood now. She understood everything. The invitation came at the end of that second visit, offered with the hesitant hope of someone unused to extending such gestures. Elena asked if Marcus and Lily would like to visit her office. She wanted to show them something, she explained, something she thought might matter. Marcus agreed before his natural caution could intervene. The Vance Architecture offices occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. Elena met them in the lobby, dressed casually in a way that still probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Lily clung to her father's hand, eyes wide as she took in the soaring ceilings and exposed brick walls. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt interminable. Elena kept glancing at the small girl beside her, seeing echoes of her own childhood in those curious eyes. They had both grown up in a world not designed for them. They had both learned to navigate spaces that assumed everyone could hear. The main floor held the expected elements of an architecture firm: drafting tables and computer workstations and scale models of completed projects. But it was the design philosophy that made Marcus stop in his tracks. Every single project displayed was focused on accessibility, residential homes with visual alert systems built into the architecture itself, office buildings with tactile navigation elements, public spaces designed so that deaf individuals could move through them with the same ease as hearing people. Helena explained her company's mission with hands that moved faster as her passion overcame her usual reserve. She told them about clients who cried when they saw their homes for the first time, about a deaf school in Seattle that had won international design awards, about the countless ways that architecture could either exclude or embrace. Lily wandered toward a corner of the office that had been set up as a design play area, complete with building blocks and sketch pads. Elena watched her go, then turned back to Marcus with a question she had clearly been waiting to ask. She wanted to know about Lily's mother. Marcus's hands stilled for a moment, the familiar ache settling into his chest. He told her the abbreviated version. A car accident 3 years ago. Rachel had been on her way to a doctor's appointment for Lily. The roads were wet. The other driver fell asleep. Everything changed in an instant. Elena absorbed this information with the particular understanding of someone who had experienced her own version of everything changing in an instant. She shared her own story then in more detail than she had offered anyone in years. The fever that stole her hearing. The parents who could not adapt to a daughter who existed outside their experience. The 13 years of building a life and a company and a reputation, all while carrying a loneliness so profound it had become structural. They talked until the afternoon light began to fade, their hands moving through shared experiences and parallel griefs. Lily eventually fell asleep on a couch in the corner, her small body curled around a stuffed animal she had brought from home. Elena looked at the sleeping child and signed a question that made Marcus's heart clench. She asked if Lily ever wished she could hear. He considered the question carefully before responding. He told her that Lily did not wish for hearing because she had never experienced it. She did not feel the absence of something she had never possessed. What she wished for, what she asked about constantly, was finding more people who spoke her language, people who understood her world without requiring translation. The job offer came 2 weeks later, delivered not in person, but through a carefully worded email that Elena had clearly agonized over. She wanted Marcus to join Vance Architecture as a community liaison. The position would involve connecting the company with the deaf community, building relationships with organizations and schools and advocacy groups. The salary was generous. The benefits included comprehensive health coverage that would help with Lily's ongoing needs. Most importantly, the role would allow Marcus to use the language he had learned through love to help others who lived in that same silent world. Marcus read the email 3 times before his initial reaction fully crystallized. His response came fast and forceful. Typed on his phone during his break at the coffee shop, he told Elena he was not interested in charity. He did not need to be rescued or saved or pied. He had built a life for himself and his daughter through hard work and determination. He would not accept a position that was offered out of sympathy. Elena's reply arrived within the hour, and it shattered every assumption Marcus had constructed. Her words were raw in a way that her previous communications had not been. She told him this had nothing to do with charity or pity or sympathy. She told him that in 13 years of deafness, he was the first person outside her office walls who had spoken to her in sign language as a matter of course, the first stranger who had treated her native language as normal rather than exceptional. She told him she was lonely in ways that her success could not touch, that her corner office and her awards and her international reputation meant nothing. When she went home to an empty apartment where no one's hands moved through the air, she told him this job offer was selfish, not generous. She wanted him nearby because he made her feel less alone. Marcus stared at his phone screen until the words blurred. He had spent 3 years constructing a narrative about his own struggles, his own sacrifices, his own determination to provide for Lily without help from anyone. He had never considered that the accomplished woman with the corner office might be carrying wounds just as deep, that her success might have been built on the same foundation of isolation that had defined his own grief. He did not respond that day. He needed time to dismantle the defenses he had built so carefully around his pride. The week that followed was marked by avoidance and silence. Marcus switched his shifts at the coffee shop, working early mornings when he knew Elena would not appear. He told himself it was practical. He needed time to think. But Lily noticed the change immediately. Children possess an uncanny ability to sense when the adults in their lives are struggling. She asked about Elena every day, her small hands forming the name with increasing frequency. She told her father that Elena signed beautifully, that Elena understood things without requiring explanation, that Elena looked at her the way people looked at hearing children with directness rather than pity. Marcus tried to explain his hesitation in terms a 7-year-old could understand. He talked about pride and independence and not wanting to owe anyone anything. Lily listened with the patient attentiveness she had developed from a lifetime of reading faces and body language. When he finished, she asked a question that cut straight through his carefully constructed justifications. She wanted to know if being alone was better than being scared. The park meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon. Technically coincidental, but probably inevitable. Marcus and Lily visited Laurelhurst Park most weekends, a ritual that had started during the difficult months after Rachel's death. The space held no particular memories of his wife. It was neutral ground, a place where they could build new traditions rather than being haunted by old ones. Elena sat alone on a bench near the duck pond, a book open in her lap, but clearly unread. Her eyes were red-rimmed in a way that suggested recent tears. Lily spotted her before Marcus could react. The little girl broke free from her father's hand and sprinted across the grass, her arms already moving through an enthusiastic greeting. Elena looked up, her face shifting through surprise and hope and something that looked painfully like relief. She responded to Lily's rapid signing with matching enthusiasm, their hands moving so fast that Marcus could barely follow the conversation. He approached slowly, giving himself time to prepare words he was not sure he could say. Elena watched him come, her expression guarded now, in a way it had not been with Lily. The little girl served as a bridge between them, her presence softening the awkwardness of adult miscommunication. Marcus lowered himself to kneel beside the bench, bringing his face level with Elena's. He signed slowly, choosing each gesture with care. He told her he was sorry. He told her he had been afraid. He explained that accepting help felt like admitting failure, and he had spent 3 years trying to prove that he could do this alone, that he could be enough for Lily without requiring assistance from anyone. Elena's response came with tears. She no longer tried to hide. She told him she understood that fear better than he could know, that she had built an entire empire on the foundation of never needing anyone, that her success had come at the cost of connection, and she had only recently begun to realize how high that price had been. The job began 6 weeks later. After careful negotiation and clear boundaries, and Marcus's insistence on starting at the lowest possible position, he would prove his worth through performance, not through the generosity of a woman he had begun to care for more than he wanted to admit. The work itself came naturally. Years of navigating the hearing world with a deaf daughter had given Marcus an intuitive understanding of the challenges faced by the deaf community. He organized workshops to teach basic ASL to Vance Architecture employees. He connected Elena's designers with deaf consultants who could provide feedback on accessibility features. He brought Lily to the office on days when school was closed, letting her play in the design area while he worked nearby. 3 months passed in a rhythm that felt increasingly like home. Elena and Marcus developed a working relationship that slowly deepened into something more personal. They shared lunches in her corner office, their hands moving through conversations that ranged from work projects to childhood memories to the particular loneliness of existing between two worlds. Lily began calling Elena by a special sign name, a personalized gesture that deaf culture reserves for close relationships. The 3 of them went to dinner together on Friday evenings, a tradition that started accidentally and quickly became sacred. The email from Elena's parents' attorney arrived on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Elena sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the words on her screen with an expression Marcus had never seen before. He found her there when he returned to grab a forgotten jacket. The lights dimmed and her face illuminated only by the laptop glow. She was crying without sound, her shoulders shaking with the force of sobs that no one could hear. Marcus sat beside her without asking permission. He did not sign anything at first. He simply placed his hand over hers, offering physical presence in a moment that seemed to transcend language. Eventually, Elena turned the laptop so he could read the message. Her parents wanted to reconnect. After 13 years of silence, they had learned that their deaf daughter had become successful, wealthy, noteworthy. The timing was not coincidental. They wanted something, though the email did not specify what. Perhaps money. Perhaps the reflected glory of association with her achievements. Perhaps a late-stage attempt at reconciliation driven by their own mortality. Elena's hands moved through a confession she had never shared before. She told Marcus that she still remembered the last thing her mother said to her, spoken rather than signed, because her mother never learned to sign. Her mother had said she did not know how to love someone she could not talk to. That was 13 years ago. Elena had not seen either parent since. Marcus considered his response carefully. The situation had no easy answers, no clear path forward. He could not tell Elena what to do with parents who had abandoned her during her most vulnerable moment. He could only offer what he had learned through his own grief and his own journey toward acceptance. He told her that no one deserved to be abandoned, that the people who left had made their choice, and their later regret did not obligate her to anything. But he also told her that she deserved to choose who remained in her life, that the power had shifted, that she was no longer the frightened 19-year-old waking up to silence. She was a woman who had built something remarkable from nothing, and anyone who wanted to be part of her world now had to earn that privilege. Elena looked at him with an expression that contained multitudes: gratitude and fear and hope, and something that looked very much like love. She signed a single phrase that changed everything. She told him that for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. The first anniversary arrived on a Sunday morning in early spring. The morning grind had changed in the year since Marcus first stepped out from behind its counter to help a trembling stranger. The cafe now hosted weekly ASL conversation hours, organized by former colleagues who had been inspired by that initial encounter. A bulletin board near the entrance displayed flyers for deaf community events and resources. The owner had installed a visual alert system for orders, making the space more accessible for deaf customers. Marcus sat at their usual corner table with Lily on one side and Elena on the other. Their hands moved through easy conversation, the kind of communication that required no translation between thought and expression. Lily showed Elena a drawing she had made at school, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. The figures were labeled in careful child's handwriting. Daddy, Elena, me. A young woman entered the cafe, her movements carrying the particular hesitation that Marcus recognized immediately. She approached the counter with obvious anxiety, her hands clutching her wallet like a lifeline. The new barista, someone Marcus had personally trained in basic ASL, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. His hands moved through a simple greeting, asking how he could help. The young woman's face transformed with relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Elena squeezed Marcus's hand beneath the table. Their eyes met in shared understanding. This moment, this small act of accessibility and inclusion, represented everything they had built together over the past year. Not just a relationship between 2 people, but a ripple of change spreading outward through a community that had too often been overlooked. Lily noticed the exchange at the counter and waved enthusiastically at the newcomer. Her small hands formed an invitation, telling the stranger that everyone here understood that she was welcome, that she was seen. The young woman smiled for what might have been the first time that day, her shoulders relaxing as she realized she had stumbled into something rare and precious. Marcus looked around the cafe that had become so much more than a workplace. The community that gathered here each week, the connections that had formed between deaf and hearing customers who might never have interacted otherwise, the small revolution in understanding that had begun with nothing more than one man's decision to step out from behind a counter and meet a stranger in her own language. He turned to Elena, his hands moving through words he had been waiting to say for months. He told her that before she walked into his life, he had been surviving, going through the motions of each day, caring for Lily, working his shifts, counting the hours until he could sleep and escape the weight of his grief. He told her that she had given him something he had not known he needed, not rescue or charity or even love in the traditional sense. She had given him a reason to believe that the silence he had learned to navigate could become something beautiful rather than merely bearable. Elena's response required no translation. Her eyes said everything her hands could not express. They had found each other in a crowded coffee shop, 2 people fluent in a language most of the world did not speak. They had built something new from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. And now, sitting together in the soft morning light, they watched as that something continued to grow. The cafe hummed with activity around them. Hands moved through air heavy with the smell of fresh coffee, and the warmth of human connection. And in that corner booth, a family that had chosen each other sat in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally dancing through the space between them, speaking a language that needed no sound to be heard.